Welcome to Stay Reformed, a podcast discussing a variety of topics from a confessionally Reformed Baptist worldview. I am Garrett Shepard.
And I'm Bobby Miller.
And I think you all are in for a treat today. We have our very first in-person interview. He is an adjunct professor of systematic theology at IRBS and pastor at Grace Baptist Church in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. He is also the author of Still Confessing, an exposition of the Baptist Faith and Message 2000. Dr. Daniel Scheiderer. Daniel, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, we're very thankful for the friendship that is blossoming amongst us, and we're very thankful to Vincent Flutie, a brother that we're all three familiar with, who introduced us, and we're grateful to have you here.
Yeah, it's been good getting to know you guys and getting to know Vincent. He's been able to attend some of our evening worship services, and we've enjoyed getting to know him there.
Well, before we really get into it, why don't you take some time to introduce our listeners to who you are, a little bit of your background, and just make us more familiar with Dr. Scheiderer.
Sure. So I'm originally from Tucson, Arizona. I grew up there, and I was saved at a younger age. I grew up in a Southern Baptist church. Well, grew up going to a Southern Baptist church, kind of a typical Southern Baptist church for the 90s to the mid-2000s. Joined the Army right out of high school as an infantryman, was stationed in northern New York, and then got married right after I got to my duty station, my first duty station, to Patsy. We have 4 children now. Our oldest 2 are girls, Anna and Malia, and our next 2 are boys, Danny and John. I deployed to Afghanistan as an infantryman. I did serve as a chaplain's assistant for a little bit during my first deployment, and for our purposes, that's where I was originally introduced to the concept of God's sovereignty and salvation, God's predetermination and control over all things, including salvation. I didn't really resist it much because I figure if God's in control of all things, why would he not be in control of the most important of things for me? Mm-hmm. And so there was no real resistance on my end. I was wounded both times I was in Afghanistan, and had to go to San Antonio, Texas, for recovery. And there I retired from the Army and began training for ministry. I did desire to go into ministry. While I was in recovery, I came across the teaching of R.C. Sproul and really learned from him, learned Reformed theology as well as many other things from him, and then ended up moving to Louisville from San Antonio in order to do my Master of Divinity at Southern Seminary, the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and my doctoral work. We ended up moving to Massachusetts for a little bit, and then now to Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, in order to pastor the church here at Grace Baptist Church. I was originally ordained first as a deacon and then as an elder there at Cosmosdale Baptist Church in Louisville.
So the church you pastor at now, if I understand correctly, it does have ties to the Reformed Baptist movement. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. So the church that I'm at now, Grace Baptist Church in Chambersburg, has really deep ties to the Reformed Baptist movement as a movement in America, beginning in the mid-20th century. So if you trace back Baptist history in America, most of it begins in the particular Baptist movement that was in England and was here. So there are debates over Baptist identity in England, whether or not it is general Baptist or particular Baptist, or to what extent there were ties and there was blending of the two groups or what have you. But here in America, it was largely just from the particular Baptist stream. And so in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, Baptists in America really come out of the Reformed Baptist stream, what we now call Reformed Baptist, particular Baptist stream. And yet, as you get to the end of the 19th century, you start having these more fundamental debates over the veracity of Scripture and what has come to be called the modernist fundamentalist controversy in the early 20th century, and so really Reformed theology takes a hit, and Calvinistic theology in Baptist life really takes a hit in the first half of the 20th century. In the mid-20th century, though, you have the rise of Reformed thought again by Baptists. So we could go a little bit further back. You go to J. Gresham Machen and the founding of Westminster Theological Seminary in 1929, and really in the 30s, you have the growth of Reformed thought again, or the standing firm on Reformed thought is the way that goes. But there's a church in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, a Presbyterian church that was embracing more of this liberal thought, but there was a group within that church that was evangelical, that was holding fast to some of the core tenets of classical Christianity, and that group leaves the Presbyterian church there and forms what now is called Grace Baptist Church in Carlisle. In 1959, they adopt the Confession of Faith, the Second London Confession of Faith, and really becomes, it seems to be that it's the first church in decades to adopt the Second London Confession again here in America. So that would be in 59. Our church was planted by that church in 69, and first it was planted in Shippensburg, Pennsylvania, which is just north of a smaller town, just north of Chambersburg, and then they really settled in Chambersburg, and it was originally called Westminster Baptist Church, but now it's Grace Baptist Church in Chambersburg. As just another tie to the Reformed Baptist movement, another major church that had been influential for the growth and recovery of Reformed doctrine by Baptists was Trinity Baptist Church in Montville, New Jersey, which is just kind of a suburb of New York City. And that church was reconstituted as a Reformed Baptist church in 67, and so right around the same time, just before our church was planted. And our second pastor, Bob Carr, was the son-in-law of one of the elders at that church in Montville. And as far as I know, Walt Chantry, major voice in the Reformed Baptist life in the 20th century, and Al Martin, the pastor, one of the pastors there at Trinity Montville, another major voice, preached the ordination or installation of Bob Carr at our church in 81, I believe. Bob Carr was involved in the old Reformed Baptist Association, which goes back to the late 60s, and it was in existence really through the 70s and 80s and into the early 90s. And he was really the last moderator of the Reformed Baptist Association, which was a looser association, more informal in reality. And he was also at the meeting that talked about the constitution of a more formal Reformed Baptist Association that ended up being called the Association of Reformed Baptist Churches in America, or ARBCA. Now, our church didn't join ARBCA initially. It wouldn't be for another decade until our church joined ARBCA, and it's not presently part of that association for various reasons. But that just shows that our church really kind of has as its history the history of the modern Reformed Baptist movement in America.
That's really awesome. Yeah, it's funny though that it kind of came out of a Presbyterian church, because obviously they realized, wait a second, we shouldn't be baptizing our babies.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Sort of drilling down a little bit further as we're talking about SBC life, because we know that you've been a part of SBC churches in the past. When we first met together over coffee, we were speaking about your book, which is called Still Confessing, an exposition of the Baptist faith and Message 2000. And it is very helpful in understanding Southern Baptist beliefs, but also taking that current confession that we have and rooting it in past particular Baptist context. So it was very helpful, I know, for me. And it's very conversational in its read as well. So it's approachable in its cadence. It's not something that I think people would struggle too much to understand or grasp the concept. So definitely we'd recommend it. So that book specifically, I know we've talked about it sort of offline, but that came out of a direct result as you were formulating teaching through the Baptist faith and message at Cosmosdale Baptist Church. Is that correct?
Yeah. At Cosmosdale, I was teaching through it in Sunday school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So was it something as you were teaching this class that you thought, hey, I should write a book about this, or was it more so people had encouraged you to say, yeah, I think you should put this out there for others to maybe benefit from?
So maybe to spin our tale some more.
Yeah, go ahead.
Story time.
Story
time with Dr. Scheiderer.
That's right.
So very instrumental in the founding of Grace Baptist Church in Carlisle was an individual by the name of Ernie Reisinger. Mm-hmm. Ernie Reisinger was one of the elders of Grace Baptist Church in Carlisle. And yet he was also the owner of a construction company and all these things. So he retires and moves down to Florida. And as he moves down to Florida, a Southern Baptist church down there calls him as pastor, and there you really have the beginning of the founders movement, and really the beginning of the conservative resurgence. And maybe we could talk more about that. But around that time, as this Reformation is really going on in Baptist life in the 70s or so, so also this little church in Louisville, Kentucky, which actually wasn't little at the time, Cosmosdale Baptist Church, also calls a pastor, Pastor Bob Harker, and he engages in reformation of one of these SBC churches. Now, if you know Reformed Baptist, or if you know Southern Baptist life and you think Louisville, you don't think probably immediately of Cosmosdale Baptist Church. Instead, you think of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary.
Right.
Think of Al Mohler. I mean,
Al Mohler.
Just
that's
comes to mind. Exactly. Yeah.
And so what you have really is the founders movement ties into Cosmosdale. So most of the churches there had become liberal in Louisville, and Cosmosdale is engaged in Reformation, has ties to founders, brothers that are involved in founders. And founders, one of their staples is an abstract of systematic theology by James Pettigrew Boyce, the first president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, one of the presidents of the Southern Baptist Convention in the 1800s. And Cosmosdale was involved in actually handing out copies of that to students and graduates there at Southern Seminary in the 80s. And so the church was engaged in this Reformation, actually engaged in it, not just watching it from afar or wishing for it, but was engaged in it and was seeking it not just for themselves, but even for other churches that were associated with them in the convention. Cosmosdale has a setup to where officers have to confess the Second London. So all the elders and deacons must confess the Second London Baptist Confession of Faith. Anybody else who teaches, Sunday school teachers and anything else, have to teach within the parameters of the Second London Baptist Confession of Faith, the 1689 or 1677, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But to be a member at the church, you have to hold to the Baptist Faith and Message. So the Baptist Faith and Message has greater breadth in terms of who can confess it than the Second London, even though the Second London has greater breadth in terms of the content. So if you think of concentric circles, the Second London is narrower within the broader teaching of the Baptist Faith and Message 2000. And since our members were required to confess it, I was teaching through the class, but I also, as I'm looking for resources, there really aren't resources that help you to confess the Baptist Faith and Message that are solidly Reformed.
Yeah.
There are resources, but they generally stay within the breadth of the Baptist Faith and Message 2000. And really, we wanted our people to be more thoroughly within. Obviously, we're wanting them to come to embrace all the teaching of the Second London. And so I was looking for resources. There really weren't any. Founders has resources that help with the various doctrines, but not the whole confession as a whole. And so I figure, well, I'll teach through this. I'll put together my notes as a manuscript and ask founders if they would like to publish this. You mentioned that it's conversational in style, and I had already mentioned R.C. Sproul was a major influence in my life, and one of the things that I find so helpful about R.C. is that his work is thoroughly rooted in Reformed doctrine, and you can tell that he has read much deeper than what he's presenting, and yet the things that he's presenting are an easy bridge to get into the depth of the actual Reformed faith. And so I aimed at something like that, and really it's up to readers to decide whether or not I've done that well.
I think you succeeded.
But well, and that is my goal, and I have I may say it at the beginning, maybe I don't, but in the footnotes I have deeper resources. So the idea is keep the body of the text as accessible as possible, and then provide deeper resources for people to be able to go further and get a more thorough theology from a largely Baptist perspective.
It's funny you say that. When I first began kind of wrestling through Reformed theology, I remember I was like steadfast, and I'm going to read Calvin himself, and so I purchased Calvin's Institutes, and I thought that was going to be my gateway, and I was going to understand Reformed theology perfectly by reading Calvin's Institutes. And I think I got 4 pages in and shut the book and almost gave up until a brother recommended What is Reformed Theology by Sproul.
Yeah.
And you're right, like the way that he presents it is just so, it's clear, it's precise, but it's just so rich. And I think your style is similar.
Yeah, it is similar.
Yeah. I think everybody. I don't want to be like those who say, "Well, I became a Calvinist without ever reading Calvin."
Yeah.
I don't want ignorance to be a badge of honor.
Yeah.
I've read Calvin and I enjoy reading Calvin, but Calvin is writing for ministers, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And so most people aren't ministers, and most people that should embrace these truths aren't necessarily ministers, and so we need something more accessible, more capable of being grasped at a more typical level of reading the Word and thinking through the teachings that are in it.
Yeah, I mean, even the Second London talks about saving faith and understanding the Scriptures, that for the learned and the unlearned, they should be able to grasp those things. So yeah, I think that's key.
So next episode, we're going to go a little more in depth into the Baptist faith and message. But to end out today's episode, I kind of just want to see your thoughts. Can a church be confessional but only have the Baptist Faith and Message 2000 as its confession? Because you said at Cosmos Dale you had the elders and deacons with Second London and then the membership with the Baptist Faith and Message. Do you think it is possible to only have the Baptist Faith and Message and still be confessional?
Yeah, well, it depends on how we're defining confessional, because the Baptist Faith and Message is a confession of faith, and so technically every church that holds to it is confessional in the sense that they have a confession of faith. We would be able to say that its parent document, the New Hampshire Confession, there are plenty of churches that have that as their confession of faith, and so in that way, yes, it is confessional. A church would be confessional. One of the difficulties of doing something like that is the Baptist Faith and Message is purposefully broad, and particular churches need to have particular stances on various things. And so the Baptist Faith and Message could be within a more narrow church that's going to be Calvinist, but say Calvinist, or, if that's what we're wanting in terms of a confessional church, if we're wanting a church that would stand in line with the Second London, that would be possible. But the problem is that there wouldn't be a guardrail to keep it within that tradition if it only has the Baptist Faith and Message, because it's purposefully broad. And so, since confessions of faith are intended to sort of police the boundaries of a group, the Baptist Faith and Message polices the boundaries of the SBC, which has breadth. Most congregations, local congregations, want less breadth, and so will want a narrower confession of faith. If they only have the Baptist Faith and Message, they really have no ability, apart from adding things to their constitution or what have you, that will keep it within the identity that they're seeking to uphold. And so I do find it best to have a more thorough or robust confession of faith as a congregation, which is why we had the Second London. We're very conscientiously within the Reformed Baptist world at Cosmosdale. We were, and so yes, we were in dialogue with and in joint efforts and communion with churches that weren't as Reformed or wouldn't identify themselves as Reformed at all. But we knew that within our congregation, this was the direction that everybody was heading in. And so it depends on what you want. I think probably it's best to have something more robust in your local congregation.
I would think, and I don't know this, and maybe you give me your thoughts on this, but I would think someone who truly studies the Baptist Faith and Message in its original intent and its content would desire that more robust confession. And I think it's a starting point, because once you get through it and you read the whole thing, it almost makes you want more. So I would wonder if they would almost lead to the desire for a more robust confession.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something too, thinking about all that's been said. So Riesinger, in his publication, A Quiet Revolution, he talks about when he first went to that church in North Pompano Beach, and he would appeal to the Baptist Faith and Message as a starting point to take his congregation deeper towards a more robust confessionalism. So I think that's probably what we would say is helpful.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, I think if you go through, the book is giving an exposition of the confession. If you enjoy the doctrines that are taught there, and you enjoy it not just yourself but as a congregation, then you might want something that actually expresses those things explicitly and helps others to embrace those things as well, which really is what a larger confession is seeking to do.
Mm-hmm.
Our prayer today comes from the Valley of Vision, and it's titled Reproofs. O merciful God, when I hear of disagreeable things amongst Christians, it brings an additional weight and burden on my spirit. I come to Thee in my distress and make lamentable complaint. Teach me how to take reproofs from friends, even though I think I do not deserve them. Use them to make me tenderly afraid of sin, more jealous over myself, more concerned to keep heart and life unblameable. Cause them to help me, to reflect on my want of spirituality, to abhor myself, to look upon myself as unworthy, and to make them beneficial to my soul. May all Thy people know how little, mean, and vile I am, that they may see I am nothing, less than nothing, to be accounted nothing, that so they may pray for me aright, and have not the least dependence upon me. It is sweet to be nothing and have nothing, and to be fed with crumbs from thy hands. Blessed be thy name for anything that life brings. How do poor souls live who have not thee, or when helpless have no God to go to? Who feel not the constraining force of thy love and the sweetness of communion? Oh, how admirably dost thou captivate the soul, making all desires and affections center on thee. Give me such vivacity in religion that I may be able to take all reproofs from other men, as from thy hands, and glorify thee for them, from a sense of thy beneficent love, and of my need to have my pride destroyed. Thank you for listening in. We hope you've enjoyed your time with us, and it's been a blessing to you. If it has, would you take a second to share it with someone? And then make sure to like or subscribe to our podcast on whatever platform you use. You can also check us out and give us a like or follow on X and Instagram at StayReformed and Facebook.com/StayReformedPodcast. You can send comments or suggestions to StayReformedPodcast@gmail.com. We'll see you next time.
And until then, make sure you stay informed and stay reformed. Soli Deo Gloria.